Welcome to the Talking Free podcast. As the girl who has always been told she talks too much, can speak with a mouthful of marbles underwater, and can sell ice to Eskimos, I have found the perfect platform to have my say, freely. I am here to share with real people, having raw conversations about authentic stories. It is a place where you can feel safe discussing anything and everything. These stories will make you laugh, cry, debate, wonder, intrigue, and get curious about life as you talk free with Trudy Marie. Please note that the following podcast may contain discussions or topics that could be triggering or distressing for some listeners. I aim to provide informative and supportive content, but understand that certain themes may evoke strong emotions or memories. If you find yourself feeling overwhelmed or in need of support while listening, I encourage you to pause the podcast and take a break. Remember that it is okay to prioritise your well-being and seek assistance from trained professionals. There is no shame in this. In fact, it is the first brave step to healing. If you require immediate support, please consider reaching out to Lifeline on 13 11 14 or a crisis intervention service in your area. Thank you for listening, and please take care of yourself as you engage with the content of this podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Talking Free podcast. And it is the final episode of the Talking Free podcast as you know it. As of the next episode with a new guest, I will be rebranding the podcast to better suit my original intention of what this podcast was about. And a lot of that revolves around this week's episode, which is all about me hiking the Bibbulmun Track from end to end in 2023. It is also the prequel to my book that is about to be published. And my book is all about this trek that I did on the Bibbulmun Track. So my story starts with being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder in November of 2021 while working as a police officer with WA Police. I won't go into details about that particular incident. That's for a whole other episode. But it is what started me on this entire journey. I was referred to a psychiatrist, and I chose not to be medicated in this particular incident as I did not want to feel numb. I wanted to deal with the pain, I wanted to deal with the trauma, and I wanted to know what was going on with Trudy. In February of 2022, I was admitted as an outpatient to Perth Clinic to undergo some cognitive behaviour therapy. And from there, I started to research and try a number of different modalities on my healing journey. And during this time, while I was getting some amazing results from different styles of therapy, nothing seemed to gel overall. I felt like there was a missing piece, that I was dealing with little bits and pieces of my life, but not kind of coming up with an overall solution. In April of 2022, we sold our family home in Perth, and our only base became Narrogin, which is where my husband was still stationed as a police officer and where I was on stress leave. At this point, I became agoraphobic, and I was also diagnosed with major depressive disorder. And what this meant is that for literally about 3 months, I was confined to my house, not being able to leave the front door. In fact, I could barely get out of bed. I couldn't function. I couldn't shower. I just had no purpose and no reason to get out of bed. It's when I hit what I call my rock bottom. And to be honest, it was the worst time of my entire life. And I am now 49, and I would hate to think that anybody would go through that kind of scenario with their mental health. It was horrible. But at some point, I realized that something had to change, because I didn't know who this version of Trudy was. I had no idea who I had become. I can hand on heart say that there was at never any time any suicidal ideologies. I love my children too much to ever do that to them. But I was at my rock bottom. I was at my lowest point and I had nowhere to go but up. I felt like the way I can describe it is being at the bottom of a well, and I had actually let go of the final rung, and I had to reach up and take a hold of that first rung to be able to climb up outside of this deep, dark hole I'd gotten myself into. Around September 2022, two things happened that would change the trajectory of my therapy and my life. The first is I watched or rewatched the movie Wild with Reese Witherspoon, which is the story of Cheryl Strayed hiking the PCT. That is the Pacific Crest Trail that runs along the west coast of North America, from Mexico in the south to Canada in the north. Now, I'd previously watched this movie when it first was released, but rewatching it with my husband, I realised it was more of a mental health journey. And I actually said that to my husband, and I said, maybe that's something I need to do. And he said, what? Go hike the PCT? And I said, no, I was thinking something a little closer to home, maybe the Bibbulmun Track. And he's like, yeah, cool. How much of it? And I'm like, the whole thing. Now, to put things into perspective, I had never done anything more than about a 10 to 15K coastal or bushwalk in previous times, and I'd never camped before. In fact, I hated camping. Give me a caravan or a hotel any day of the week. Just don't put me in a tent. And the idea of doing 1,000-kilometre hike absolutely scared the shit out of me. But it was a thought that was planted in my head. Around the same time, I did a 5-day challenge. Now, that was with a business mentor through an online community, and we were just given the task of setting a 5-day challenge for ourselves. Now, as somebody who was agoraphobic and had not really been able to, or very reluctant to leave my house, I set myself the challenge of walking to my local coffee shop each day of the 5 days to get a coffee. It meant that I had a direct route to take. I knew where I was going. I knew what I was doing. And for me, I had all the safety mechanisms in place. And I did complete that 5-day challenge. The next step was for me to actually start going for walks on a daily basis. So I started walking through a local reserve, which was about 3 kilometres, leaving my home, walking around the trail and coming home again. And that was a start for me. And this idea of walking the Bibbulmun Track probably was just like a pie in the sky dream. Like, it was something I said fleetingly, but didn't really expect to kind of carry through with it, I suppose, at this particular point. It wasn't until my husband bought me a tent for Christmas that I went, is this telling me something? And he said, you're not the type of girl that when she puts her mind to something, she does it. And having integrity, you're normally somebody that's going to carry through with what you say. And that really got me going. I was like, yeah, I've kind of got this idea in my head and now I need to actually do it. So just after the new year, I attended a 1-day retreat to set myself up for the new year. And it was on that retreat that I actually declared to a bunch of strangers that I was going to walk the 1,000-kilometre Bibbulmun Track end to end from Albany to Kalamunda. So I seriously started researching, starting with the Bibbulmun Track Foundation website, which is an amazing resource for anybody who is considering like literally hiking any section of the track, whether it's a particular section, an overnight hike, or doing the whole thing. I even attended one of their seminars about hiking end to end. I started creating a number of spreadsheets which detailed my journey. So I literally had how many days it would take, how many rest days I would have, how many kilometres each day, the differences between the different huts. Everything was like mapped out down to the last letter. I also included like what food I would take, because I knew that I would have to cook, dehydrate, vacuum pack the majority of my food. And for this, I mainly used online websites from the United States because they have some of the most epic through hikes in the world. And I found a lot of really cool recipes and stuff for that. I also made the choice to rat pack or ration pack my food. And I discovered on the track that most people just carry a bag of food, and inside that bag of food, because everybody puts their food in dry packs to protect from critters and also from the wet. But most people would just carry breakfast, lunch and dinner all together in that bag. But I made the decision to pack for each day. So my rat packs included breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, desserts, any drinks that I wanted, and they would vacuum packed inside the one bag with each day labelled on it. I then put all those particular bags into resupply boxes, and I included another bag that had basic toiletries, so things like shampoo, body wash, a razor, moisturizer, anything I thought that I might need, including spare batteries, new toilet paper, everything that I would possibly need went into these resupply boxes. And I then spent one day driving from Perth to Denmark, dropping all the resupply boxes off at the tourist information centres. Now, I chose to do it that way, one, because I lived in WA, which made it super easy to go and do. But the tourist information centres are open 7 days a week, and they also cater for the end-to-end hikers dropping off these or posting these resupply boxes to them. As long as you have your name, phone number, the fact that you're an end-to-end hiker and a possible ETA. So I did that, and then ready or not, I was going to start hiking this 1,000-kilometre track. Now, for those who don't know WA or the Bibbulmun Track, the track starts with the northern terminus in the Kalamunda Hills, just east of Perth, and it meanders its way down through the southwest and basically connects a number of smaller walking trails that were there in the past to create this one long through hike, and it finishes at the southern terminus in Albany on WA's south coast. There are a number of track towns along the way, including 2 small hamlets. So not true towns, but there are facilities at each of those 2 places. So I started my trip in Albany on the 1st of April. And the reason I decided to go northbound, or NOBO, as we affectionately say on the track, one, I wanted to travel away from the weather. I started in autumn here in WA, travelling for most of April and May, and I knew I didn't want to be near the coast come winter. So I decided to head north away from the coast. Secondly, as this was such a huge mental health journey for me, I wanted to travel towards my North Star. So travelling north, coming home to myself, remembering who Trudy is and who I'm meant to be. And so that had a real significance for me as well. Finally, the reason I chose to do it is that inside my research, I discovered that a lot of people felt deflated at the end of their trek because there was nobody there to celebrate and acknowledge their journey when they finally got to either the southern or the northern terminus on their last day. So I wanted to make sure that all my family and friends that were available were going to be there in Perth at Kalamunda on my final day. I also decided to use the track name of Everyday Warrior, which is also the name of my book. The reason I chose that is that one, Trudy actually means maiden warrior or female warrior. And I wanted to come across as this everyday person who was just ready to fight for what was possible and fight for my life, really. So you have to enter your details in the logbook. So the parks and wildlife logbooks are there for an emergency situation and also for tracking statistics for the Bib Track Foundation. You can either use your real name or you can use a track name. So I became Everyday Warrior in that. I also wrote in the book each day a quote, and I'd specifically mapped out these 64 quotes that I would include in the book every day on the track as a motivation for not just myself, but for other hikers who would become after me. I also made the choice to carry no medication, as in paracetamol, ibuprofen, anything of that nature. And I also chose not to have any audio distractions, so no music, audiobooks, or podcasts. This was literally going to be me, myself, and I on the track to feel everything. It was the only way I knew how to rediscover myself. And so I set out starting with Section 1, Albany to Denmark. Now, this took me 6 days and was 85 kilometres, and I ended with a rest day in Denmark. It was hard. I'm not going to tell a lie. I started with my period, so I felt absolutely uncomfortable and disgusting with no shower, no nothing, and I could have quit possibly day 2, possibly day 3, and wondered if I had myself cut out for this journey and what I'd gotten myself in for. But when I got to the end of the bay that I'd walked around, I realised as I looked back just how far I'd come. And normally when I look back on my life and different aspects of my life, I'm always looking at where I went wrong, what I could have done better, just the negative implications of when you look back in the past. Like, let's be real, we all do it. And in that moment of me looking back around the bay, all I could see was how far I'd come, and realise that that's something we should all do more of, is actually look back in our past only to see where we've come from. And on top of that, in the moment, I was just extremely grateful for where I was. And as I turned to walk and continue on the track, I realised that it didn't matter that I didn't know my track and I didn't know anything else other than my destination. I just had to trust the process, that I was going to get where I needed to go. And honestly, if that's all I learned from Section 1 and that's all I learned from the whole track, then that was an epiphany moment for me. In Denmark, I met the most gorgeous and gracious couple who really took me under their wing and looked after me on my rest day in Denmark. And I'm proud to say that I am still their friends today. So Rob and Deb, thank you so much for having my back and just being there for me at probably one of my most broken points. During this section of the track, I also came across my first end-to-enders, both going in the same direction as me and also coming from the north heading south and going Sobo, as we call it. And I made the decision that I was going to take a photo with every end-to-ender along the way. And let me just tell you that I met 59 other end-to-enders on my journey. The next section, Section 2, from Denmark to Peaceful Bay, was only 3 days and 63 kilometres or thereabouts, and it was the most horrendous 3 days on the track. I could have quit. I was ready to quit, and it was only the conversation of a gorgeous gentleman in camp one night that told me that this day of the track was bloody hard and the next day was going to be just as hard. But after that, I would get better, the track would get better, and that I could do this. And honestly, he was the reason I kept going. And I am extremely grateful to say that because he gave me some details in camp that night, that I was able to go and thank him personally a few months later after I'd completed the track, because he's the one that had me do it. When I got to Peaceful Bay, I also had an unplanned rest day, which, let me just say, the universe gave me because it knew I needed it, and I was able to recover from that horrendous 3 days. Section 3, Peaceful Bay to Walpole, was much more pleasant. It was probably the 3 of the best days on the track. Like that particular section is just so beautiful. And it was 3 days and about 63 kilometres again. And what I really looked forward to in that section of the track was the fact that I was going to meet my hubby in Walpole. So he decided to meet me there as a last catch up before he flew home to the USA to catch up with his family. And to give you a little bit of context, during my whole experience with my PTSD journey, the major depressive disorder and the agoraphobia, he was my lifeline. Like, he was the main person there for me. But because of all his family being in the States, apart from his son here in Australia, I felt like he had missed out. Like, he was there for me, but no one was there for him. And so while I was on the track, he decided to go home to the States and have his mom look after him. And I was just like, this is the perfect opportunity for you to get some R&R and for you to reconnect with who you are. So this was going to be our last connection prior to him flying out. And he also bought my resupply box for that particular section. We had a great time catching up, went to our favourite restaurant in Denmark called The Dam. And yes, even though I just spent 3 or 6 days walking from Denmark to Walpole, he drove me back in about an hour. But that was just, one of the fun aspects part of the track. So from there, Section 4 was Walpole to Northcliffe. That was 8 days and about 142 kilometres. It was the longest section I had to carry supplies. So 8 days worth of food, somewhere between 4 and 5 kilos that I had to add to my already heavy pack. That was going to be tough regardless. On top of that, I sustained ankle injury. Now, in 2018, I had torn my Achilles playing netball and had a long time recovering. And unfortunately, just the trekking I was doing and the constant up and down, it really strained my Achilles, and I wanted to nurse it because, by God, I did not want to tear it again. So I ended up nursing that injury for about 200 kilometres. It was horrible. I don't know how I did it. It took something. And again, without any pain relief, I just had to feel it all. During that 8 days, I also went 4 days on my own with nobody in camp and nobody on the track. So it was a long, lonely journey in that particular section, and where I actually did a lot of shadow work. Like, it was freaking hard. I'm not going to lie. But the beautiful thing that came at the end of that when I got into Northcliffe was that on my rest day, my dad, who had flown in from Queensland for his 70th birthday, drove my 2 children down to see me in Northcliffe. It was a complete surprise. They drove down 4 hours, returned 4 hours, and spent a couple of hours with me by, funnily enough, driving me to Pemberton, which is where I was about to walk to. But I will be forever grateful for that surprise, because there was a storm in Northcliffe. I was in a little cabin all on my own with no internet, no TV, no radio, pretty much no phone service either. And I'd resigned myself to the fact that it was going to be a really shit rest day. But them surprising me was incredible. I got to see my daughter before she flew back to Bali. I got to see my son. But I also got to hug my dad, and having just discovered some father wounds and healed some father wounds on the track, it was really important for me to actually see him and hug him in that moment. So the timing was perfect. So after Northcliffe, I headed on Section 5, 3 days and 60 kilometres to Pemberton. And I was familiar with this particular part of the track, not that I'd walked it at all, but this particular area I'd holidayed in quite a bit. So it brought back some lovely memories. I loved the area, and I just really enjoyed that particular section of the track. Got to Pemberton and I received the first of 2 resupply kits that I hadn't counted on. The first being thermal underwear that my sister sent me because it was getting bloody cold and I really hadn't planned on it and I hated the cold. So that thermal underwear came in very handy moving forward from Pemberton. So starting section 6, going from Pemberton to Donnelly River, that was about 5 days and I think about 109 kilometres. And the best part about that section was getting to the halfway point. And that's an amazing feat in itself. Like for me, just standing at that halfway marker, seeing Kalamunda 501 Ks, Albany 501 Ks, getting my photo taken using the little supplied selfie stick that they have carved out of a log, and just being able to stand there and appreciate that I'd made it halfway was super incredible. And you're doing it in a really difficult section of the track because the Donnelly River roller coaster is called that for a reason. It is a constant up and down, up and down, up and down motion. Like I was over it. Like I swear to God, one day I just felt like I was going around in circles. I chose not to have a rest day at Donnelly River because I got in at lunchtime and I had the rest of the afternoon to literally put my feet up and relax. And it was in that camp on that particular day that I met the lady responsible for basically encouraging me to write my book. Like she's since become a friend and she's like, I want to read your story. When are you going to write a book about it? And that's how my book basically come about. So kudos to Miranda if you're listening. From there, we had 3 days in section 7 going from Donnelly River to Bailing Up, and that was about 59 kilometres. And I also have to give a shout out here to a guy named Simon from New South Wales. So I first met Simon at the first camp just outside of Northcliffe, and he was my camp buddy literally from Northcliffe through to Bailing Up. And I have so much respect for him and what he taught me, how much he put up with me for, because let's be true, Trudy can talk. And he just gave me hope every day because I think during that time, I just knew I would see a friendly face in camp every day. So he was amazing. But just outside of Bailing Up, I rolled my ankle again, the same ankle that I'd been nursed already for 200 kilometres. And by the time I got into Bailing Up, I realised I also had a blister between my toes. So again, a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort, and wondering how I was just going to get through this next battle with my body and the injuries. So I had a lovely rest day in Bailing Up, basically just keeping my feet up and relaxing and not doing anything and not feeling guilty about it either. Then moving on to section 8, which was Bailing Up to Collie, and I did that over 4 days and it was about 86 kilometres. And the thing I remember about this particular section was I was nursing my sprained ankle, but I was also going through a section of the track that had recently been affected by bushfires. So there was a lot of charred remains. It was very desolate. It was very melancholy. And my mood just took on the same. Like it was just, this was like reliving like Walpole to Northcliffe all over again, but in a different way. And it was a tough section on the track. Like there were some long days in that section, not necessarily due to the kilometres, but just mind over body. Like it was hard. Finally got to Collie and that was great because my rest day, I had booked accommodation with a bath, so it was great to have a soak. I also treated myself to a massage, and let's be real, there was lots of muscles. I didn't realise how sore they were. And I also looked at my feet and went, wow, I'm really going to need a pedicure at the end of this because my poor little feet had been hiking, you know, day in, day out and had never seen so much hard work, I don't think. But from there, section 9 was Collie to Dwelling Up. That was again 7 days and about 130 kilometres. But it was in this section of track that I met an amazing mother and daughter who were doing a week hike as part of their training to do a section of the French Alps. and I'm still friends with Ali to this day. And they were just amazing company. Like, I was so inspired by them and what they were doing, and just their banter and the love they had for each other was just amazing. And I'm so grateful to have spent that time with them. However, it was also the time that I face planted the track. I have no idea how I did it, no idea how I fell. All I can remember is hitting the track face on, knocking myself out, waking up going, what the fuck? And the only injury I suffered out of all of that was the fact that I put my top 2 teeth through my bottom lip. I didn't have any other injuries, had a few gravel grazes, but I didn't have any other injuries. I didn't break my walking poles, nothing. It was just how I did that, I have no idea. But it did make me hyper cautious going forward. And I really thought that I was going to quit the track again because I just didn't know if I could go on. It was also a section of the track where there was absolutely no telephone reception. So I couldn't speak to family either to let them know what I was going through. The only people who kept me sane were Ali and Daisy. And I am forever grateful for them just looking after me during that section. In Dwelling Up, I got to see my cousin Kathy, who had driven across from the Mandurah region to see me and spend some time with me on the track. And that was amazing. She just returned from a trip to Italy as part of her work, and just catching up with her, seeing a family member, a friendly face after everything I'd been through was just a beautiful way to spend my rest day. And I'm forever grateful for Kathy coming across and spending that time with me. I finally get on to section 10, which is the longest section between Dwelling Up and Kalamunda. It took me 13 days to walk 211 kilometres. It's also a section of the track that is long because there is no track town in this particular section. So you need to have what they call a track angel to resupply you with any food supplies if you're not carrying your whole weight. And I was lucky that I had my husband to do this for me. I did have a sneaky one night home because one of the camps I was supposed to stay at had a diversion on because of burning, and it was only an hour from our home. So hubby came and got me, took me back. I was blessed to have a shower and not have to do 13 days without a shower. But it was great to see my dogs, have a nice steak cooked, and, you know, sort of re-prepare. I also emptied my load. Like, I lightened off as much as I could. Whatever I didn't think I would need, I left at home. I even left my spare clothes at home so that hubby could wash them, ready to resupply me with. So it worked out well in the end. And the camp I missed, we'd actually hiked to because it was where my hubby was going to resupply me. So I'd already walked that section of the track, so I didn't feel guilty about going home for the night. I also met in this section, after going back that night, a lady by the name of Louise. So she had caught up to me and she's like, wow, you're the everyday warrior who's been leaving those amazing quotes. And I really felt, you know, this warm and fuzzy feeling knowing that she had been coming behind me and she'd actually been reading what was in the book. So that sort of, I was chuffed for a little bit there. But it also put me in a bit of a dilemma because I didn't expect to walk with anybody on the hike. I'd solo pointed up until that point. So the last probably 150 odd Ks, I was going to have somebody there. Now, Louise and I didn't walk the whole time together. Like, there were sections where we kind of, one of us would walk ahead and one of us wouldn't, but we were always in camp together. And similar to Simon and I, but Simon and I never actually hiked together apart from one day, and he was always just in camp. But Louise and I quite often set off together, like stopped together, and then, you know, we're in camp together. So I was like, you know what, the universe has presented me with this. This is a lesson I need to learn. Let's just go with the flow. I was also extremely track fit by this section. So doing the hills of Mount Cook, Mount Vincent and Mount Cuthbert, and let's be real, they're not mountains, they're like hills. But this section was a way easier than what the sand dunes and everything had been along the coast when I very first started. So I knew that I was what they call track fit, and I was actually starting to enjoy those particular days on the track. We finally get to the end point of my final day, and I woke up on that last day, leaving the track, saying goodbye to Louise, and I literally cried most of the way to the finish line. I was just so overwhelmed with the fact that I had accomplished this thing I'd started out to do, and also I didn't want to leave the track. Like, I did not want to step foot off the track back into reality. I was actually really enjoying the peace and serenity of being on the track, but I knew, as they say, all good things come to an end at some stage in that way. And I remember stopping at the Trails Cafe, which was previously owned by another lady, and she gave Devonshire tea to the end-to-enders. And I was just so happy sitting there chatting with her, and we're still friends now, and just chatting about like my journey and what I discovered along the track. It was also very, very busy on that particular day. It was a long weekend in June here in WA, and I think I counted like 60 plus hikers that were on the trail that particular day. So it was just the perfect weather to be out having a day hike in the hills, which gave me very little opportunity to actually sort of focus on anything else than the task at hand. About 2 kilometres from the finish line, I was met by one of the gorgeous ladies from Buddy Up Australia, which is an organisation I am part of, which they're incredible for supporting veterans and first responders. So shout out to them. And she had walked in to meet me and support me in that last little bit coming out. And I was so grateful for her company in that last little section to just be there for me in a way that I suppose no one else could at the time. But when we got to the final hill at the northern terminus, I looked up and I could hear my family cheering me on. And I remember stepping off the track into my son's arms, and he had his sister and my sister on FaceTime from Bali, and I remember just having him hold me because he's a 6'4" giant, and just crying. And I'm going to get emotional here, but turning to see my other 2 sisters with my mum and dad on each of their phones on FaceTime because they're both on the East Coast, seeing my husband, seeing my 2 nieces with a sign saying welcome home, seeing my girlfriends, it was just such a special feeling that they were all there to welcome me home with open arms. And they had been there with me every step of the way. Like, they had supported me unconditionally, giving me what I needed to complete this amazing achievement. And I think it would be hard-pressed to find another achievement apart from being, a mum to my children and marching out as a WA police officer. This will go down in my life as one of my greatest achievements because I had to overcome something that I didn't think I was strong enough or capable enough of actually achieving. And I remember my son had bought me a bottle of Verve champagne, and I cracked it open and drank it from the bottle, as you do. And then we walked up the hill to the Kalamunda Visitor Centre to sign the book for the last time and to ring the end-to-end bell. And that moment for me was such a poignant moment in the whole journey, because on the days that I didn't think I could do it and the days that I felt like quitting, ringing that goddamn bell and the vision of ringing that bell was what kept me going. So being able to do that at the end was absolutely incredible. We celebrated across the road at the pub with a lunch, and as something I'd done at every track town where possible, I'd celebrated with a palmy and pint. So on my last day, you can guarantee that I also celebrated with a palmy and a pint. And it was just such an incredible feeling. I literally cannot describe it more than that. And how the book came about was an outcome of one of my psychologist appointments prior to starting, because I had the full support of both my psychologist and my general practitioner. And my general practitioner looked after me every step of the way. Like, I had regular check-ins with her along the track to make sure that I was going okay. And my psychologist had suggested that I keep a journal along the track as a way of remembering what I went through and also reflecting back on anything that came up. It was something that we could discuss in our sessions, like post the track. And Trudy, being as OCD as she is sometimes, I had a very strict way of putting everything in my daily journal entries. And I also completed a 2, 4, 6, and 8-week reflection. I also completed a final reflection and a reflection 1 year on of how my life had turned out post-track. So it was with Miranda's insistence that I write my story. I decided not to write my story made up from memory. I would actually publish my full journals. And that is a really raw, honest, and vulnerable share to put my words as I experienced them on the track, as I lived on the track, to let the rest of the world read. And the reason I'm doing this is because I don't want somebody else to feel alone. I want somebody else who may be going through some kind of mental health journey, that has suffered some kind of trauma, that is going through their own shit, to pick up those pages and read, not to make me out as a hero, not to make me out as somebody special, but to understand that there is other people out there experiencing similar to what you are, and that I can be a glimmer of hope for somebody to just keep putting one foot in front of the other and to keep on going. So I'm going to leave my story there about hiking the Bib Track. I have deliberately omitted some details because, hey, I want you to buy my book. I want you to read my full story. So the details will be in the show notes. If you're listening now, as this podcast episode is released, you will have to register for a copy of the book. If it's later on, you can head straight to my website to purchase your copy. As an extra, if you also want to see my journey firsthand, looking at photos and looking at my video journal, I actually diarise the entire journey on my Instagram account. You will have to scroll back through about a year, but you can go into the Reels section and see the live recaps that I did of each section. But if you scroll back through, you will get to see all the daily videos and all the daily photos that I posted along the way. So I hope you have enjoyed a little more candid one-on-one account of my Bib Track story. And I really do hope that you purchase and read my book. And if you think that somebody else could benefit from my journey and my own mental health journey, then please find a way to get them a copy. And if you have any issues with that, please give me a call and I will see what I can make happen. Thank you for being a part of the Talking Free podcast as she stands. And please stay tuned for the new version that is about to come in the next episode. Thank you for tuning in to the Talking Free podcast today. If you have an idea for a future episode or a story you'd like to share, then please message me, as I am always up for real, raw, and authentic conversations. If you love what you are hearing, then please be sure to subscribe to hear all the latest episodes and spread the word to your family, friends, and colleagues so they too can listen in. If you are sharing on social media, then please be sure to tag me at _Trudy _Marie _ so I can personally acknowledge you. I am always open to comment about how these episodes have resonated with you. It would also mean the world to me if you were to leave a 5-star review to ensure the Talking Free podcast is heard by more listeners around the world. And remember, lead with love as you live this one wild and precious life.